go straight into
Okay,
because
let's
the
go
other
straight into
politics is complex and it will take a while to.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so one of the things I was really interested in is ISIS captured the town of Dabiq.
Yeah.
And their glossy English magazine was Dabiq as well, which is one of their recruiting tools. And one of the reasons that it was so integral to them was that they saw it as a kind of place of Islamic Armageddon where they would finally face off with the Christian Crusaders. And I was just wondering what your thoughts were on that, how that figures into Islamic scholarship and the history and philosophy of it.
Look, ISIS
Was
is
that reasonable?
Look, Look,
Yeah.
let me tell you this: Al Qaeda. We know Al Qaeda as a terrorist organization. We know them as extremists, right?
Yes.
Al Qaeda declared ISIS as extremists. I mean, that tells you the level of extremism of ISIS.
Well, they're mutually, they're all sort of mutually antagonistic, aren't they? I mean, I'd read something talking about
They became competitors.
Yeah,
basically.
Boko Haram, the Taliban, ISIS. That ISIS may be in competition with the remnants of the Taliban to take over Afghanistan. Yeah. They're antagonistic.
Yeah. Sure. Look, I actually examined the Dabiq magazine and its contents and its language, and did a conference presentation on that. I actually was looking at the theological justifications of their actions. They always justify what they do with Islam, or sometimes quoting verses or sayings of the Prophet or some sort of a religious ruling in the past. But it's always there's some utility in what they pick and choose. Let's say, for example, they capture a town, and they get 2,000 Shiite young people. What are they going to do with them? If you really follow proper Islamic law, they should be looked after well. They should be fed well. I mean, you imprison them, but treat them humanely and so on. But what they do is they go and execute everybody. And the reason for that, and then they give a justification of it. But it's really the utility, because it's better in their eyes to just get rid of these people than look after them, because looking after is expensive, it takes resources. What if they escape? So it's the utility. And another example is Yazidi women. They're selling Yazidi women to slavery. They have these volunteers from across the world, young people. Their blood is boiling. They've got sexual needs. You can't get married easily. How are you going to meet their needs? Okay, so it's so convenient to enslave these Yazidi women and then sell them amongst the warriors. So it's the utility, unfortunately, of. So they pick and choose these references, either interpreted themselves or they take a fringe interpretation. They take it as the normative ruling, and then they apply it to the situation they're in, which produces a very grotesque, unfortunately, expression of Islam and Muslims.
I think there's probably heterogeneity even within that. I remember reading about the Taliban selling women into sex slavery from villages that they'd conquered into Pakistan. But not all of the Taliban were on board with that. So some of the Taliban captains actually broke off and moved away because they believed that was wrong. They received a huge amount of international criticism because their rationale for their strict codes of dress and the behaviour and the escorts of women was around women's protection, but then they were doing the selling women to sex slavery. But you see that there are different values, and there must be various different iterations even within one group.
ISIS is not seen as a legitimate theological view. They don't even follow theological proper theological school.
That's why they say so-called
consistently.
caliphate, don't they?
The caliphate is a political position.
Right.
It's an executive role. Caliphate was, the last caliph was the Ottoman Caliphate, which was abolished in 1924.
But that was essentially, in terms of Islamic scholars, that would be an official caliphate, and the caliphate launched by ISIS would not be considered an official caliphate.
That's what Muslim scholars, or legitimate, I would say. Because the Ottoman one was legitimate, was well accepted by Muslims around the world, whereas the ISIS one is self-declared.
Yes.
And there's no, for caliphate or the leadership, to be legitimate, it needs popular support. And in Islam, this is in Islamic political theory, that you must get popular support.
Yes.
Whoever the leader, however they're elected. But definitely ISIS never had that support. And if you put it to vote, I don't know what they would get, 0.001%.
Right.
Or Muslims would probably support them. But they wanted that. The ISIS saw an opportunity there to grab hold territory which was just free to take, and then declare a state, and because they claim to be Islamic, and it can only be a caliphate.
Yes.
And that's appealing, in a way that's appealing to Muslims, because even today there's a lot of Muslims think that Muslim world, even though they are a very large population, 1.7 billion Muslims in the world, they suffer in the geopolitical game because there's no balance of power. And that if caliphate was established, if there was a single person who represented all Muslims, it would give that person a lot of clout in international diplomacy, and hopefully that should be in the favor of Muslims.
Yes.
Or Muslims at least should be equal in the table of diplomacy.
It's the
and
return of modernity, essentially. It's the development of the modernity that we talked about.
So some Muslims see that as a solution to establish a caliphate. So it does have a ideological support to some extent, but when even those Muslims who support the idea of a caliphate would not necessarily support ISIS, because their idea of a leadership in the Muslim world is more modern and perhaps more proper and something that international community could deal with. Sit down and have a talk.
Right.
I guess this is a very important element of that Muslims have to think about. In my view, the challenge for Muslims from politics is kind of develop a governance model that is Islamic, but also at the same time it can be seen as fresh and acceptable to international community. I'm not saying that is the criteria, but I guess the measure of something being good is if non-Muslims can see the goodness in it, and can actually find it acceptable, even if they disagree. We definitely saw that with early Muslims, when early Muslims went spread across the Middle East and then North Africa, even Central Asia, in India and so on.
Yes.
When they went, they actually provided a fresh political rule, which was freedom was very important. They provided less tax, more freedom for individuals, and they find it more tolerant.
This is more like liberalism, essentially.
It was more liberal for its time.
Yes,
I guess if you bring all of that to today, probably it would fall short a little bit.
Yes.
But nevertheless, people sometimes invited Muslims in because they saw them as liberators, and when Spanish Inquisition was happening in 16th century, 500,000 Jews were kicked out. Muslims were kicked out of Spain. Spain was 70% Muslim at some stage, and these people largely went to Muslim countries. Even the Ottoman Sultan Bayezid received asylum seekers.
Yes.
They were properly recorded, and there was a settlement process. They settled them in different cities, towns, so that they were equally distributed. And so they were looked after well, they were received well.
Yes.
And then even Sultan Bayezid sends a letter to King Ferdinand and says, thank you for sending the best of your people over.
Right.
We needed them.
Right.